Okay, hello, my name is Anne Light. I'm also speaking on behalf of Irina, who's sitting here, and Alison, who's somewhere very far away. And I just wanted to explain a little bit about how this was born, because I just got to the point where I couldn't write anything else except this paper. I had to write this paper before I could start writing about anything else again. And then I had tea with Irina and Alison and discovered that I wasn't the only person. So there may be others of you who connect with this sense of loss of certainty and what I would call maybe a cultural existential crisis. So let me start by the big questions. What should designers do with their design skills and orientation to the future as right-wing populism sweeps through politics, climate predictions worsen, mass migration escalates refugee numbers, new classes of automation threaten workers' jobs, and austerity policies destabilize society? So actually, this isn't a very funny paper, I'm sorry. And I could say, what is to be done when even broken concepts of progress no longer seem to be progressing? So that's our question for this talk. And I'm going to make a few quick definitions. Existential, relating to existence, its nature and its value. Crisis, a time of intense difficulty or danger, a time when difficult or important decisions must be made, and the turning point in a disease, or more specifically, when an important change takes place indicating either recovery or death. An existential crisis, according to Wikipedia, is a moment in which an individual questions the very foundations of their life, whether life has meaning, purpose, or value. I would say that whole cultures can do this. I'd also qualify this by saying that I'm writing with people based in Europe. We are in America addressing CHI. It is a Global North paper for Global North people in this context. I mean, broader than that, I hope, but that I would just like to qualify what we're saying. So it's not new to have crises, to have... this is a picture by John Martin. He was painting at a time when the Industrial Revolution was at its height. The picture you see is heavily influenced by the furnaces of the Industrial Revolution, even though he actually calls it the Great Day of Wrath. So this is just another thing that's going on. And this time it's the Anthropocene, which is a proposed epoch dating from the start of significant human impact on the Earth's geology and ecosystems. It includes but also transcends the duration of what we're now calling climate change. And I would like to qualify how we're using it here. It's not used here to indicate an inevitability of human impact on other life, but to highlight the present relation of dominance and carelessness. So the point overall then is that the end of the world is always with us, and worrisome to different degrees. And this was a Twitter comment that got circulated just on Saturday. It got to me. By this time it had been circulated by about 7,000 people. When dystopian fiction writes itself, and on the one side it's moving an iceberg, and on the other side it's ice melting and freeing up. Nasties like anthrax and other diseases that have been at bay for a long time. So there is a reason why people are starting to worry about what's going on in the world. But how is this worry manifesting? So our question then is saving humanity, and we are using it in two senses. Humanity meaning both a species, but also a particular characteristic of how we treat each other. I'm calling them version 1 and version 2. And we can lose either or both. And we think that maintaining humanity version 2 leads to a greater chance of species survival. So we could say this is a kind of good. And we can consider whether technology is an answer, a cause of loss, or both. And in version 1, I also want to quote something quite impactful. I don't know how many of you have looked at the book Homo Deus. It's the follow-up to a previous work by the historian Harari. And he says, the very power of science may increase the danger because it makes the rich complacent. How rational is it to risk the future of humankind on the assumption that future scientists will make some unknown discoveries? If bad comes to worse, engineers could still build a Noah's Ark for the upper caste. The belief in this high-tech ark is currently one of the biggest threats to the future of humankind and of the entire ecosystem. So that's version 1. Version 2 is dignity and decency. And here we'll quote Margaret, who says, a decent society is one in which the institutions do not humiliate people. And this is the slide with lots of words on it, because we decided to look at the digital guises of institutional humiliation. And I don't think I'm going to read you all of it, but you'll see that it includes things like intensification of systems efficiency, techno-paternalism, data being used against us, both our present forms and in the future, addictive behaviours led by things like gambling systems that know just how to keep you going, automation at checkouts in the workplace, policing performances, personalisation that actually separates people from each other and destroys collective approaches, and smart cities, homes and tools that take over the management of everyday life too far. These things strip out the meaning in life, and humans need meaning in life to flourish. So that's our existential starting point. And for that, we need to go to some theory of meaning and of existence. And we're saying here, not Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He puts self-actualization and meaning at a top, and he says that we have to sort out physiological needs and safety needs well before we can consider that. And we're going to replace that here with Viktor Frankl's work, who was a Holocaust survivor, saw in action how these things played out, author of Man's Search for Meaning, and 2 points here. Life is never made unbearable by circumstance, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. And when a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. So how does this relate to technology? Well, there's 2 things. I think we're describing more of a design mood than a whole series of actual recommendations. It's just a provocation. But our tools can help shape us and help us handle uncertainty in constructive ways. And we can design more wittingly to manage fear and angst and find fulfillment. Can technology fix things? Well, no, technology itself tends to excel at logic and rules, which is good for equality, for balancing things out, and it's good for control, but not at graceful enactments of kindness and decency. Humans can excel at that. Is design helping us do that? And now this was a little bit, what should we say, foreshadowed by Carrie's introduction, Bovine Design, which is when we play to the herd-like qualities of human beings. So designers can use this to nudge us into certain kinds of behaviour. And that makes total sense when we're talking about walking down a street and not walking into obstacles. I'd argue it isn't very useful. It's possibly even dangerous if we start to navigate society in moral and other terms. Bovine Design exploits the well-worn track. It curbs reflection. It stifles creative energy. And it writes out dignity. Because where there's rote behavior, there can be no dignity. And when people start amusing themselves with multiple screens and following the latest fad and doing little of consequence or ambition, then we can see that as Bovine Design. That can be the achievement of Bovine Design. And it's dangerous because what we actually need to be talking about is something that is so culturally different that we need to be outside the present paradigms to solve it. So here is a spectacle of alternatives. And none of these is a solution, it's just some ideas to think with. And sensible remedy is to encourage tools that focus on meaning, purpose and fulfillment for difficult, unstable and rapidly changing times, and we need both sides. And we propose design for being attentive, different, critical and in it together. Being attentive, paying attention to the more than human world doesn't only lead to amazement, it leads also to acknowledgement of pain. We need to be designing for things to be less comfortable. The least we can do is strive for the grace to accompany fellow species towards their and perhaps our extinction. We need to notice. We need to design for the radical act of paying attention to things that we do not wish to see. Designing for attention has philosophical benefits, focusing on human flourishing and addressing qualities of humanity rather than the preservation of human societies at all costs. We can design for being endlessly different. I can't say yet that much about it here. I want to write further about it. I think we all do. But the point is that we don't know what's going to happen. There's a talk of the long now to think about designing for things that need to withstand great futures. But at times of rapidly changing circumstances, we don't know. That still sounds like designing for empire. We need a slender now. We need a point at the crossroads where we don't know how things could shift, and a whole set of technologies that we don't have to just throw away when we find we got it wrong, or find that we can't throw away when we've got it wrong, but we can actually keep us light on our feet. We have to design to be critical, because if we silence those critical voices, who's going to point out when the machinery is taking us in the wrong direction? And whose future is made and how is a question of knowledge and power. Imaginaries of the future have agency. So we need to be designing stories for technology and presenting conflicts and blind spots. When you look at some of the stories about the future, we get stories like the singularity, which is a technocratic vision. We get the arc. What are we getting instead when we want to just tell those stories of humanity? So ask these questions. What results in fulfillment? What supports a compassionate response? What brings us all into constructive intimacy? What cultivates a creative mind? What is the decent society? And how do we design for these as circumstances change and change again and keep on changing? And we're in it together. We are complex, inconsistent, and oblivious, and we need to design for knowing that, for our blindness to accommodate it as well as challenge it. We need to recognise that ease is not serving us. At present, for many of us, we have a very comfortable existence. It's not going to be enough to be comfortable in the future. We need to be wandering at the world and wandering at it as it changes and working out our responses to that. And HCI is not the right term. In the Anthropocene, all entities engage with human-made technology. We need to be looking at the balance impact of our digital next steps for all, with all. It needs to be ecologically driven. So this brings us back to dignity, decency, and meaning. And come back to Frankl. There is survival value in the will to meaning, but as to mankind, he was writing a while back, as to humankind, there is hope for survival only if humankind is united by a common will to a common meaning. In other words, by an awareness of common tasks. So we started by saying that the end of the world is always present and worrisome to different degrees. What is interesting is how we choose to respond to that. So to conclude, we're in it together, and I want to pose these questions to the audience. Are we trusting in the arc to survive? And are we designing with the idea of an us that is somehow separate and safe? And I'd like to thank the SIGCHI reviewers, jurors and chairs, and everyone present, and ask if there are any questions.
Thank you. Very, very interesting and thought-provoking talk. There's a book called The Conversations at the End of Time, and it came out around 2000 when there was also a lot of conversation about the world ending. And I remember there was a conversation there with Umberto Eco, and he kind of was talking that this discourse around the world ending recurs a lot at different times. Having said that, that doesn't take anything away from the call to, I guess, the way I read it, a vision for a better world that we kind of can bring about as designers and taking responsibility to move towards that. But I think there's a lot of emphasis on negativity and fear within communities that are not serving the kind of the upper caste. How can we come up with, or maybe if you have ideas, come up with solutions that are inclusive, but they're not completely pessimistic that the world is going to end or we have to let go of the Noah's Ark or anything similar to that, but also including everyone in that conversation.
That is the big question. I realise that in accepting, or potentially accepting, that we don't have a future, it doesn't negate how we treat each other. In a sense, it makes it more important how we treat each other. That almost like if you decided to, one of the things that Frankl says is if you came back, if you treat your whole life as if you're actually living it for the second time and you got it wrong the first time, how would you live? And in a sense, if you treat your whole life as if actually everything will end, so we have to be decent to each other because it's already a fait accompli, then that's almost more empowering as a way of working than, I mean, in the paper itself, it's a bit more critical perhaps of governmental stances because I was just so angry about the way that what was happening was that mass denial was going on at the point when there's actually some really beautiful things going on, like, you know, the Paris Agreement was very beautiful. There's also still a real will to keep that going in most countries. But I'm standing in one country and I'm from another country where basically the governments have gone, hey, we need growth. And that's driven by a very short-sighted and an undigested way of trying to please a particular community who have been treated very badly and who do not have fulfillment anymore. And I absolutely think that something about work and dignity needs to be reintroduced and that machines are potentially compromising that. And this is not a populist agenda. It's something that we can do in a very different way. So I would say that, yes, we do need to look very closely at the machines we're putting into the world and how they communicate to, and I say everyone, but maybe very much not necessarily this room, but the people who are being sidelined by them.
Hi, I'm Bert from University of Washington, and I have a kind of a simple but complex question. Are you hopeful? And if so, or if not, why?
Gramsci once said, let's see if I can get it the right way around. We're not standing on the podium, this would be such a failure. Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. So I'm out canvassing at the moment because we have a general election, because it's really important that we do something. No, I'm not hopeful. I think hope's irrelevant almost. I'm determined to make change.